Paso, welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we ask the big questions with you. My name is Kim Díaz, and I'm a philosopher here at EPCC.
And my name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher from the University of Texas, El Paso.
And today we have Richard Barakat, who is a native El Pasoan and a graduate of Irvine High School. He attended Vassar and Trinity College, Dublin. He also lived as a writer in Dublin for 32 years. He has published 6 books there. And RTE, the Irish national broadcaster, produced 2. His latest book, Faust, the Magician, was published in 2018. He is honored as a writer by Vassar on their website. Thank you for being here today.
Welcome to our show.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Well, as Kim mentioned in her introduction, you've written several works. You're a published author. Kim and I read one recently, your most recent one, Faust the Magician. And as an author, as a writer, working in the field of English literature, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of beauty. And that's kind of the topic we've been focusing on this year. And we'd just be interested in asking you what you think of beauty. How does beauty show up for you in your work, for instance?
Well, in general, beauty is perfection of language and perfection of form that makes a work of art, no matter what art form that is, irresistible, transcendent, and even divine at its highest. That's the ideal. Works of art that come close to that ideal are the Parthenon sculptures, Mayan sculpture, Mayan and Toltec temples, Chinese classical painting, Leonardo's Last Supper, the tragic dramas of the 17th century French poet Racine. But in actuality, there are gradations of artistry and gradations of beauty. And connoisseurs and critics and college students can debate the merits of works of art based upon their beauty. Also, a work of art can be beautiful without being perfect. In fact, it can be flawed and still be beautiful. Works of art that are flawed can sometimes convey a pathos and a tragedy that works that are more accomplished may not be able to convey as powerfully. So I believe that beauty is an essentially mysterious spiritual quality that works through the artist in relation to that artist's personality and the gifts of his talent, the culture and civilization in which he lives, and the time in which he lives. And because an artist's style can change and often does throughout the course of his artistic life, that in itself begs another kind of question. Why does an artist's style change in relation to works which were beautiful when he was young and beautiful when he's in his 60s or 70s? It is a different kind of beauty. So ultimately, I think it's a mysterious quality, and one must go back essentially to the artist and his gifts.
So would you say beauty is then kind of a formal quality, or is it something that's more emotional? You characterize it as perfection and a kind of a spiritual, mysterious spiritual quality. Is it especially cognitive, or I guess my question is, what kind of faculty does it hit me at? You know, is it a rational
Emotional,
sort of
cognitive, yeah.
Rational or emotional sort of experience that happens when I say something is beautiful?
I think that depends upon the experiencer of the work of art. The three of us can experience a work of art and will in different ways. We can agree on certain tenets of it. For example, its emotional appeal or its intellectual appeal. But I don't think that goes quite deeply enough. Beauty, if it is truly conveyed with power, will hit us at a multiplicity of levels. If we can put our finger on it ourselves, then we're doing a good job. But I think most people are satisfied with the experience of beauty and to be in its presence. It's more the philosopher's project to try to define and to go into the kind of details in which you've outlined. I don't think that, I always feel that definition goes wide of the mark, because I think it's important that art criticism and literary criticism play a role, because it grounds theory in actual works of art, and there can be great variance of artistic quality and artistic form even within what we call a particular school. So I like to view a work of art in its individual nature, and then perhaps discuss it philosophically within relation to that work of art.
I would like to turn our attention to this book that you wrote, Faust the Magician, which is a very dark story. This is written in the form of one long type of poem, but it has scenes, and I was wondering, well, it's a very dark story, you know. I mean, most of us know the story of Faust, who just briefly sells his soul to the devil, makes a deal with the devil. I'm not sure if it was worth it, but you know, that's in essence the story. I mean, very, very briefly. When you were writing, were you thinking, I was wondering, were you thinking of seeing it acted out, like a monologue, or?
I see it as a drama.
Uh-huh.
That's why I compose it in scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is a poetic drama, but so are Marlowe's Dr. Faustus and Goethe's Faust. But I conceived it and wrote it as a drama.
And okay.
Yes, and the central character, of course, is Faust himself.
And
but
so,
go please.
because we talked about form and we talked about in relationship, you mentioned it can be flawed, right? So this is the story of, I think, a flawed individual and a flawed, I would say, he wasn't thinking straight. But it's still a work of art. How can such a dark story still be beautiful?
Oh, I think it can be. Well, take Macbeth. Macbeth has a rich, dark, brooding, mysterious medieval beauty about it, aesthetically. Yet it's about witchcraft, madness, and murder. I think a work can be dark and be aesthetically beautiful.
Do we want to talk about aesthetics?
Well, aesthetically beautiful, yeah. So in what way do you mean by aesthetically beautiful? What is, how impairing aesthetics with beauty? Because beauty, I think, is a subcategory of aesthetics.
I agree.
Aesthetics is the larger category. In terms of its aesthetics, and to come back a little bit to the line of questioning that I started off with, is the beauty in the darkness of its aesthetics something that calls to a darkness in me or a recognition in me? I'm trying to understand, why would it be characterized as beautiful in that case? Is it representational?
Let me say something else. You know, to me, it seems like somebody who seeks power and is willing to compromise their soul. It's hard for me to see beauty in that. And I know that's my subjective interpretation, but it seems more of a, I guess I'm more used to the more traditional beauty of this person sacrificed something and their soul, there was growth instead of character loss. You know, so to me, like the compromising oneself to that degree is not aesthetic or beautiful.
I think we're talking from two different perspectives here. I think Macbeth is beautiful in its style. style is essential to aesthetics, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the beauty of Macbeth, in my argument, is different from the beauty of Antony and Cleopatra, which is exquisite,
Mm-hmm.
subtle, richly nuanced and witty. And it's different from Timon of Athens, which has a crystal Athenian clarity about the style. Incidentally, Antony and Cleopatra is classified as a Roman play. I believe that is incorrect. I believe it is an Alexandrian Greek play.
Mm-hmm.
The aesthetics of it is Greek, not Roman as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
They're tragedies, calling forth the kind of qualities and the kind of questions that you raise about Faust. Different ones, but still tragic. From a stylistic point of view, I believe that all of the plays I mentioned are beautiful. The nature of their beauty is differently, but they're all based in the style. Shakespeare's one poet. The plays I've mentioned have very different styles about them, each beautiful. That sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Once one gets into the world of the play itself, now we can talk about the character and the dramatic situations and so forth. But in terms of it as a work of art, an objective work of art, I find all four plays beautiful, but the nature of their beauty is different. Faust is a towering, tragic figure. Nevertheless, you could have a show on Faust alone, and we could discuss, or whoever you have in your panel could discuss his nature. But the idea of one wanting to pursue a kind of godlike status, I don't think is unique to Faust. The Caesars had it. Other artists have it. Michelangelo was considered a god. Phidias was considered a god. So I think we're talking about sometimes, in some of the things we say, different things, different qualities. I distinguish the work of art as a work of art from the actual world within the play.
Yeah, well, I would like to just jump back in here, and because now the way you characterized beauty is as a matter of style, right? And here we're really operating in the realm of aesthetics, because the style is like the form of the language, how it's pronounced, how the stage is set up, and those kinds of qualities. It's not necessarily the content or the character of Faust itself. It's not thematic, right? But style questions are really questions of that kind of, well, linguisticality, or the way that one crafts the sequence of events, right? In some sense, it still comes back to that original question I asked: is it an emotional sort of concept that you're getting at with style, for instance? Because in beauty, and here maybe your comment about gradations would come into play, because I can be inspired by the scene setting, the stage setting of this opera or this play, or being in the presence of a great painting or a great piece of architecture, great work of architecture. And in some ways that inspires certain kinds of feelings in me. And so this is where I'm getting at with the style question.
I distinguish between feelings and artistic style.
Yeah.
I'm a purist when it comes to artistic style, that it can be judged as style. What it evokes in the experiencer of it is another category of discussion, as far as I can see. That we can experience even the same emotional power of a work of art, but the way the three of us, the emotions that we experience may not be the same, probably would not be based upon our life experience, especially if one is mature. It can touch different aspects of our hearts and our experience. I think emotion is very important. And I don't mean to make it secondary in any way. I'm just saying that I distinguish the experience of a work of art from a work of art in terms of its style. Maybe because I'm a writer, I judge in terms of style, in terms of its greatness. I'm really, at the end of the day, only interested in great works of art, because anything less, of course it's open to debate, but certain works of art have a power which is extraordinary and lasts not only for the life of a civilization, but it can influence civilizations to come, as we've seen with our tradition in the West, which is infinitely rich. One's emotional response or intellectual response to me is another category of discussion. They mix in terms of our experience, but in terms of a discussion, I tend to look towards the work of art as a work of art first, and then its effect or effects.
I would like to ask, why Faust?
Faust is an enduring and compelling figure in Western literature. The Faust book was written in German in the 16th century, and it's said that Christopher Marlowe came across a translation of it into English, and he created his great but flawed play, Dr. Faustus, which is a serious exploration within the Elizabethan tradition of that person. And Faust was an historical person. There have been other iterations of it, but in general, Marlowe's Dr. Faustus and Goethe's Faust are considered the greatest expressions of that idea and that character. I wanted to write a darker Faust than either Marlowe or Goethe's, because I think the subject demands a darkness which is more dangerous than what they portray. Also, because of our historical moment is different from the threshold of medievalism and the Renaissance in which Marlowe wrote, and the Romantic age in which Goethe's Faust was written. I think that most people today can at least agree to some extent that we are living at a different threshold of history and of Western civilization than what was written 400 years ago or 200 years ago by those authors. So I wanted to write a darker Faust, but also a Faust which grew out of the soil of my time, which I think is very different, very unique, and very challenging.
Why dark?
Because of the subject matter. To sell one's soul to the devil, I view as a supremely serious act. I believe that the life itself is mainly an arena between good and evil. That may be old-fashioned, if not primeval, but that's what I believe.
To whom is your Faust speaking?
To you.
So to me, the reader, or to an audience in a theater, or is it meant to be staged, or is it meant to be spoken aloud?
I think all of the above.
Did you?
I would have written it to be staged. Whether it will or not is secondary. But I wanted to exist as a drama on the page. That to me is the prime goal. It speaks to my time as well as to individuals, whoever reads it or sees it, as any text does.
I would like to ask you, how would you define evil? How would you characterize it, or?
Define evil. I think it is, I believe in God and Satan. as beings.
Okay, so it can also be something external to a human.
And internal, and in the very fabric of our world and our universe.
And so then this is a type of dramatization of these two powers.
I believe so. I see ourselves as engaged in a cosmic drama. I'm not one who thinks that life is merely a sequence of days and then we die.
Is the drama sometimes a comedy, sometimes a tragedy? Depends on.
I think so, as life itself can be a tragic comedy. This comes out strongly in Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. High tragedy and middle or low comedy juxtaposed. The Elizabethans and Shakespeare, to name next to his rival, saw that in very real terms.
Is there anything redeeming about Faust?
That's an important question. It depends on who writes, who's the writer of that version of Faust. In Marlowe's Faust, he is driven down to hell. His soul is lost, and he screams at the end. You have one individual spanning 400 or 500 years in the Western tradition. That to me is a fascination in itself, and to see how that individual in art has changed with the times, shall we say.
For me, it's as a reader, it's a type of a moral play, right? Like, look, this is what could happen if you go down that path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a play to teach not so much children, but people. Yeah, right? Like, watch out for your ego's desire to have control,
There is a cautionary aspect to it. And you mentioned children. I believe that Goethe had come across the Faust legend, or at least in artistic form, through a puppet play. He'd known Marlowe's version as well. But as I say, it depends upon the artist, how he envisions this massive individual.
Okay, and so then some writers, there is no redemption other than what the readers can gather and learn. What lessons are there to be learned from the story?
Well, maybe this particular story,
Yeah.
this particular version of it, because that's, I think, that's what's
Is there
at stake here.
anything for us to learn?
I don't want to impose on anybody's reaction to any kind of work of art.
For you?
For me,
Yeah.
to sell one's soul to the devil is a very dicey act, no matter what form that takes.
Sometimes it's just a little lie here, right? Sometimes it's, oh, nobody will notice.
Well, I view it a bit heavier than that.
Well, there's something about Faust, the legend, Faust, the stories by Marlowe and Goethe and Barakat, right? And in your case especially, like, there's no dialogue. It's purely monologue. And one of the lessons to be learned, just to respond to your question, has to do with the human desire to have this kind of godly power to transcend mortal limitations, and that comes through clearly in your work as well, but perhaps in a darker way. the tragic loss of the story, and people keep coming back to it. One of the things I want to get at with the issue of beauty is, it seems to me that the reason why we keep coming back to stories like that is because there is a kind of inherent beauty and understanding that there are these high aspirations that are distorted, right? So that's part, I think, of the indirect beauty of it all. It's not directly beautiful because, you know, at least in your hands, there's a lot of atrociousness going on. So what do you think about that? That beauty has something to do with, you know, this kind of transcendent sort of phenomenon that takes us beyond our mortality, takes us beyond the everydayness of our concerns and something like that. So beauty is this like higher inspirational sort of phenomenon that gets us to think about the more deeper reasons why I want to get up tomorrow, perhaps.
Thinking, yes. And I think it's more of a falling in love. To see a work of beauty, as we're talking about art, a work of art that is beautiful, a beautiful building, beautiful poetry, painting. You fall in love with each other. And I think that's the most accurate way I can describe it. And that love can last a lifetime.
Yeah.
One can think about it, but there's no, and it's natural to do so. But I can only describe it as a falling in love with each other.
Did you fall in love with your book here, with your drama? I couldn't resist that one, Richard.
Well, I love it as a child. It's a truism that the work of art is the child of the artist. So I can say I love my son. There are works of art that I love, and I'm still trying to understand.
Yeah, because that's an important statement that you made. I fell in love with it like my child. Because in fact, then what you're saying with that is that your work is going to have legs, and it's going to be like a child, and it's going to grow, and it's going to continue on for generations, or a generation, or maybe 10 years only, and it'll kind of die off and get lost and become extinct, or something like that. But nonetheless, by considering it like a child, that reveals then, to me at least, that you have some deep concern for the future generations of humanity, right? Because you're bequeathing this child to future readers, right?
I think that every work of art has a destiny, whether it is it is destined to survive centuries, as some of our great artists have, but others haven't.
Yeah.
Many great works of art, many great artists whose names we know, we have very little of their work, if any, left. And yet so great was their reputation that their names have come down to us, even if their work hasn't. So there's not an equation between the physical life of a work of art and the reputation of the work of art, or of the artist, or of both, simply because of the destruction in which societies go through.
Yeah, the destruction of entire libraries, for
right.
instance.
Yes, of the ancient world. To think what one has lost in the ancient world is criminal.
But criminal can be beautiful. Why is it important for us humans to think about beauty? With your work here, you're a native from El Paso. I am also a native from El Paso. I grew up in Juarez. And there is, and I love this frontera very much. And there is a very, very dark side to our place in the world and our time in the world. And there is a huge black market. It's very difficult for me to think that I can find beauty in human smuggling, especially the way that it, in any way, but especially the way that it takes form here in La Frontera, right? Why is it important for us to think about beauty?
I think it's very important for everybody to think about beauty today, because in the modern world, there has grown a cult of ugliness, banality, and crass commercialism. This is in much of art, but it is especially prominent in our built environment, our architectural environment. I believe it's important that we aspire to attractiveness in what we build, whether it be our living space, our homes, our neighborhoods, our schools, our city. Not only for the visual appeal and the appeal of living in such an environment that uplifts one, but I think that beauty has it instills a moral power. It's not merely attractive, that it has a spiritual power to it. A great and tragic example of this is the demolition of the old Penn Station in New York City, which was a magnificent neoclassical structure, both in its exterior and its interior. It was an icon of the city, comparable to any of the great skyscrapers, and an icon of America. In fact, America's expression of neoclassicism in Washington, some of the monuments in some of the cities, is remarkable for its purity and its conviction. But the old Penn Station was demolished in the 1960s. It was built in the early 20th century. And it was so lamentable that even the workmen who were going through the destruction of it were moved by it very much. And it was replaced by an ugly modern building. And I'm not speaking for myself alone. I think many architects of sensitivity felt that way. But this is not an isolated experience. It's one of the greatest and most tragic ones, but it's not isolated. It's important that we keep the human environment attractive, hopefully beautiful in everything that we do. But it seems to be no longer an aspiration of artists, no matter what form they use. Now, ugliness and all the negative aspects of human character are certainly subjects of art. I'm not saying everything has to be beautiful, but to create ugliness as a kind of demand or banality or mere consumerist architecture is very detrimental. And I'm not anti-modern. The Seagram building by Mies van der Rohe in New York, I believe, is very beautiful. It has a deep, grave beauty, and it's a modern icon. And in poetry, the motto was, at the early 20th century, make it new, in terms of how are we going to speak this timeless classical language for our time. And this was a very deep concern for W.B. Yeats, Ezra Pound, and T.S. Eliot, to name the three main, or shall I say the three great exponents of that philosophy in their work. Neoclassicism for our time, yet modern. It's important that we all think about our environment more. Many people are blind to it, which in itself is rather sad. But I think our well-being as a people and as individuals depends on that.
Yes, so this is a very complex subject, this nature of what is beauty and how we go about, or why we go about creating beautiful works. And so I was listening to you, and one of your criterion is that something should be attractive. And your examples were the neoclassical ones of architecture that you mentioned. And I think that's important. But there's another way to think about beauty as a masterpiece, as a masterful work that goes above and beyond, say, banal imitation. And a work of genius, which we get from the late 18th, early and throughout the 19th century, focused on that kind of effort of what does it take to create a work of art that could stand the test of time and be considered a masterpiece, a great work of art, right? It has to inherently have in it something that draws us back to it time and time again. Has this attractive quality to it rather than a repulsive quality to it, right? Because I want more of it. So it has to instill this wanting more of it in me, that kind of phenomenon. And you've heard this already, I've said this previously. So, I don't, and it's not just cultural, it's cultural and economic current that goes on in our world that imposes forms on places that we live in and imposes things on us. And that then is that leads to the kind of concerns that Kim raised about, look, I don't want to replicate narco-culture. I want to replicate the kind of culture that leads to nourishing and sustaining communities, and not ones that, glorify these attempts to be all powerful or like demigods, kind of the theme that you deal with in your Faust, right? Because that's the Faust that you depict. The Faust is demigod. The Faust he's not talking to anybody.
Yes.
Right? There's no dialogue, there's no community building there.
Right.
Right? And that's the kind of impetus that we find.
I wanted to say, though, the attraction and repulsion are not clear-cut, because I think that we humans can be attracted and repulsed to the same thing. Just for instance, a very superficial example would be donuts. I love them, but I don't like them. Right? I just like donut, right? But I mean,
because if you eat enough of them, you become like a donut.
Right, but I mean, we all have sometimes, maybe I should speak for myself, right? But relationships with things that are a love-hate types of relationships. And it could be to our writing. As a writer, you're driven to write, and when you're writing, it's not always enjoyable, but you're driven to keep writing and to keep showing up, even though it's not necessarily the most pleasurable thing to be writing, though sometimes it can be. Exercise, it's not the repulsion and attractiveness of something isn't necessarily.
Well, what I was trying to get at was that beauty, we tend to want to have objects of beauty around us. We tend to have nice things around us, and things that are beautiful works of art and a beautiful place to live in, and there's a beauty in my street or in my train station, and I want to go to that train station because it's a beautiful place, right? I want to spend time there, right? But we don't want to go and hang out at, some place that's a radioactive nuclear waste site, right?
I think we can all agree about the points you've touched on, and it's a large subject. But I want to ask you a question now. Which philosopher of aesthetics do you find the most satisfying and the least satisfying, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Did you want to go first?
Yeah,
I teach aesthetics, so I have a whole list I can try.
I might need a little help because I forget names. I know my favorite philosopher in terms of aesthetics is John Dewey, and he wrote his book. You might be familiar with it, Art as Experience.
No, I know his name only. I've not read the book.
Yeah, I think he wrote it in 1934. I could be wrong. So at that time, he's a naturalist and a U.S. American classical pragmatist. And for him, there's so much to it. I love the way that he writes. It may not be aesthetic to others, but it is to me. I have a background in the sciences, and so he writes about humans as organisms in an environment, and compares a lot the live creature with us drawing nectar from experiences, right? So art as experience is, on one hand, against the idea that art can only be experienced in a museum or at the theater, high art, and more towards democratizing the aesthetic experience for people who tune in to watch our show, I'd like to think. It doesn't have to be only for the select few, but for the mechanic who is, full of grease in his or her hands and hears the engine run the way it's supposed to. That's an aesthetic experience. And to me, that I really appreciate, because I believe that everybody is capable of experiencing beauty. It doesn't matter if they went to Harvard or not. And I just dislike any type of cynicism. I guess I would say anybody who thinks that art is just what sells. I forget who it was. There was I forget the name of that philosopher. It's just what's in, and that's what is art, right? No, I think that there's a whole lot to it, but that's my short answer.
Adorno, Lukács. Adorno. I think you're talking about Adorno.
Yeah.
I have a complicated. I also have a complicated response to that question. A lot of my ideas about aesthetics have been informed by this German Jewish philosopher named Franz Rosenzweig, and his major book, The Star of Redemption, uses a device the overall structure of the book is framed by an interpretation of the Faust story. And Rosenzweig, contests Goethe's version of reality by introducing that as the kind of a motif at the beginning of his book, because he wants to get at a different sense of aesthetics, and one that is, he also thinks that we humans are involved in this ethical, maybe not a moral play of forces in the universe, but that we're involved in creating worlds, and a world that we have to become responsible for, and therefore we have to become responsible for each other. So, so he wrestles with this great theme of the desire for we humans to become like demigods, to have the power of God, and to see, you know, and to glory in just the work of our individual hands, you know, which is how Goethe's Faust ends, with you know, Faust doing the work, trying to fill in the shoreline in in the Netherlands, the end of his Faust, to continue the work of humanity, to kind of refashion the earth. And so there's competing visions. There's competing visions then of that have to do with that entail certain kind of ethical choices for how we promote this or that work, these are that works of art, and the cultural influence that they have on humans. And because they get put in circulation, they become like children, and other people read them, and then they get influenced by them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so that's part of it, and I think Kim was getting at that by her referencing Dewey, and Dewey's really strong social sense for aesthetics. That is, aesthetics has a lot to do with social education as well. I immediately thought, when you raised the question, you know, who can we talk about in terms of the philosophers and their aesthetics, is right now I'm getting ready to teach Gadamer. Do you know Gadamer?
No, I don't.
Well, so he was a German philosopher, and he was a student of Heidegger. And you've heard of Heidegger?
Yes.
Yeah. And his idea about aesthetics it's very powerful. He has this sense of aesthetics are art, especially. So he focuses on art, and he did his work. He did his dissertation on a philosophy of art. Art calls us into a sense of play. So we get engaged by works of art in questions about life, in questions about relationships and things like that, and we enter into them and then begin to play with them, and that becomes serious work, serious play. So works of art then are these opportunities or these sources where we humans can gather and engage in different kinds of play with ideas, play with phenomena, play with sensations and things like that. And so that becomes important because it teaches us about our own ideas that we bring to our interpretation of a work, or our interpretation of this or that work of art. And in the engagement with another, in playing with, discussing it, right? Playing with the ideas, then we test our own prejudices, we test our own biases, we test our own, and prejudice doesn't have to be necessarily understood as a negative sort of thing, just our prejudgments and our presuppositions that we bring to the table, right? So that's how art helps form us as human beings. That was a long-winded response, but
no, but everything you said is weighty. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the least favorite?
Well, for me, it's cynicism.
Yeah.
And I would like, do you have a least favorite? No?
Oh, yeah, I think the least favorite ones, I tend to forget their names. You know, there's a whole stream of aesthetics in philosophy, and they've labeled themselves analytic aesthetics, and I just don't think that they know that what they're talking about, because they have these formal categories that they come up with that they use to discern what is high art and low art and things like that, and it's along the lines of an Adorno-esque sort of elite art categorizations, right? So that's what I guess just a group of aesthetics.
We only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you, Richard, to come back more towards the beginning. Do you think if Faust had a moment of true transformation there at the end, do you think that his life, or someone who can be so evil, I mean, and cause so much harm, do you think that it's possible for them to truly, honestly, in their heart, right, if they change, if they recognize that was wrong, do you think it's possible for them to have that form of redemption?
Well, I'm, as a Christian, yes, but I am not the judge. If one takes that question in its reality, I'm not the judge, am I? One likes to think that there is always going to be the possibility of redemption, of grace, but I'm not the judge.
I don't want to end on that note, but I want to talk. I do want to say just a few. I want you to hear what you have to say about judgment, because I think judgment, things like questions about beauty, have to do with judgment.
I agree.
Yeah, and it is about judging, and we're actually called to judge.
Well, to me, sometimes when a person gets to that point, right, they had to go through all of that to get to that point. It's hard to say, and again, I'm not a judge either, even though we all make judgments. For a person, I'm just thinking in terms of Faust, right? For Faust, or sometimes we have to mess up in our lives for us to realize we messed up. I'm sorry. And now there's growth. And of course, the end might come right after. But had I not done these atrocious things, I wouldn't have realized that that was a mistake, right? And so then the mistake is part of the growth. Yeah.
Were you looking for a response from
No,
Richard?
I'm just saying that, like sometimes these horrible things have to happen.
Yeah, let me ask you one last question. Did you have in mind with this as kind of on a side burner, so to speak, something like a model, something like Paradise Lost as a model, Milton's Paradise Lost or something like that?
No, I mean, I know Paradise Lost, but I wasn't consciously thinking of that at all. I don't know why you ask regarding that particular artwork.
Because that's also this kind of tale of aspirational greatness, aspiration to demonic greatness, right?
Yes. Yes.
Something like that.
Well, Satan does have that impulse.
Yeah. And he does make a pact with the devil.
Yes. But I don't, although Milton's epic is majestic, I find that it's deficient in its concept of Satan.
Oh, okay.
I find it sometimes a little preposterous. But as a work of art, it's majestic. Again, I make the distinction between the work of art and the world within that work of art. The Romantic Age delved into this question very, very deeply, as you know. I think I tend to view it a bit more puritanically, perhaps, than they did. I believe in these beings. It's not merely a question of romantic exploration, as important as that is.
I think that this is where we're going to have to leave it for today, even though we can certainly keep talking about this and
Yes.
engage in the centuries, timeless conversations, but for sake of time, we have to wrap it up.
Yep.
Thank you so much for talking with us today.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, Dr. Richard Barakat, Kim Díaz.
Jules Simon.
Please join us next time.